Hey everybody, welcome to Breaking Rank. I am your temporary host, Sofia DeMartino, and I am here with today's guest, your actual host, legal industry strategist, Diana Lauritson. Thank you so much for joining me here today on your podcast.
Thank you for having me and for interviewing me.
So I'm so excited to have this conversation. This is a brand new podcast. I'm honored that I get to be the one to ask you the questions today. Thank you for allowing me to do that, and thank you for allowing me to share this space with you. I want to start out with, why are we doing a new podcast?
So I had a podcast before that I really loved doing, and it focused more on travel, a lot of very diverse topics. And I still might add some episodes to that podcast at some point in the future. But there were just a lot of topics that I didn't get to discuss that were really important to me. And I felt a calling to start a podcast where I could talk about some of these other really important issues, and especially ones that impact me every day of my life.
Now, I know that as an unconventional leader, there was actually a specific story that kind of served as the catalyst for this becoming an important topic to you. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that?
So it wasn't necessarily one story that was the catalyst, it was a few different things. One thing was that I started to be more vulnerable on LinkedIn. And the more I posted personal stories or talked about how something affected me personally, I noticed that it started to really resonate with people. And people reached out to me. They would share their stories with me, or, I would be in the office, in the hallway, someone would come up and say, I read your post. This really resonated, or I had a very similar experience. And so I noticed that my posts were getting traction. And it really caused me to think about how much do I really want to share in professional spaces? Because as you know, LinkedIn is supposed to be where you post professional things.
Yeah.
And when I started posting, there were some people who felt like this is too personal. Why are you sharing personal things on LinkedIn? This is not something that you should be doing. That really got me thinking, if these posts are making people uncomfortable, I might really be onto something. And so it just really motivated me to be able to not just tell my story, but to tell other people's stories, the people who have been censored or who don't fit into the traditional norms of leadership. And that's what really inspired me to start Breaking Rank.
Well, it's really interesting. I think that in the corporate world, we talk so much about honesty, about truth, about transparency, about trust us. But then we don't want people showing up as their authentic selves. So talk to me a little bit about how you showing up as your authentic self is inspiring other people to do the same.
Well, I think it's empowering for me personally because every time I write a post, I always feel sick to my stomach. And one of my good friends in the legal industry always says, if it's something that makes you feel sick to your stomach, lean into it. And it's really powerful advice because for me, when I posted about domestic violence, like right after I posted, I thought, oh my gosh, why did I share that? Why did I open that up to the world? And so it empowers me because I feel brave when I do it. And after that kind of gut feeling goes away after a couple days after I've exposed myself to the world, I feel like, okay, I'm courageous, like I can do anything. And so I always get a boost that way. And the fact that it helps other people, that I've had people reach out to me from France, from other countries that say your stories are really resonating with me, that to me makes it all worth it because you're not just sharing your story just to be like, oh, woe is me. My life is so traumatic. Look at what's going on. Nobody really cares about that at the end of the day. They're like, oh, great story. Next, let's move on. And when you feel like your stories are making a lasting impression on people, that it's helping them to be brave, like the domestic violence post, that to me is when it's the most rewarding. And that reinforces my decision to be vulnerable on social media.
Now, your life experience didn't begin with domestic violence, but
No.
you had different traumatic experiences in your childhood as
Hmm.
well. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And also, can you talk to me a little bit about the day you decided that wasn't going to be the decider for your story?
So my background, growing up was full of abuse. There was a lot of abuse. My dad was a pimp. And so I experienced and I saw him in the way that he interacted with different women when I was growing up. I am one of multiple children. My dad had children in up through his 70s and he passed away in
Wow.
2013 at the age of 85. So I was an auntie from the day I was born because I had other brothers and sisters who were in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s.
Mm.
And so it was very different for me growing up. And I watched my dad beat my mom, and watched, I experienced the abuse from both my mom and my dad. My mom is very mentally ill. I love her to death, but it was very difficult for her raising three children from a black man in a white community. And so we were always othered. And one of my relatives told me that when we were younger, they would make us sit in the car every time they would go into a store because they didn't want people thinking that they had kids with a black man.
Mm.
And so we were very othered growing up. And actually the black side of my family was more accepting, even though I ended up being closer to people, my grandmother and my Aunt Diane on my white side of the family, and my grandfather. But it was growing pains because it was challenging for them in the beginning, I think, to accept. Other than my Aunt Diane, I think it was challenging for a lot of the white relatives in my family to be able to understand the decisions that my mom made when having children. And there was a lot of, I think, kind of punishment for her for making those choices. And so I grew up very aware and very of my identity, in the sense that I wasn't really sure where I fit in, but I was aware that I was different. And it really, I think, caused me to be in this eternal search for purpose
Mm.
and figure out, like, what is my place in this world, because I knew at an early age that I was going to have to make my own place, that no one was going to give it to me.
So you talk about the different experiences that you had in terms of being accepted on the
Mhm.
different sides of your family. Talk to me a little bit about how that affected how you view relationships, communication,
Mhm.
connection, feeling worthy for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I still struggle with worthiness. It's one of the things that have I've just struggled with it. Whether we call it imposter syndrome, whether we call it, self-worth, whatever the words are, I still struggle with that because of the way that I grew up. I just am in a better place than where I started out. So I'm making progress on that front. But it was challenging for me to have to feel like I had to prove my value all of the time. If anything good happened to me, it was because DEI or affirmative action, or, never mind that I scored over the 90th percentile on a standardized test, or, whatever the case may be. It was always, and even to some family members, it was always, oh, it's because she's black. She got all of these other, privileges, which to me is absurd
Mm.
because when we talk about privilege, we're usually not talking about black people. And when you think about the experiences that I lived through, I lived through quite significant physical abuse as a child. I mean, we were turned in all the time at school for being abused, for bruises on us. I was taken out of my home many times. I've lived in foster homes and group homes and all of the things that you can think of. And nowhere, at no time when any of that happening was happening, did I feel like I was privileged.
Mm.
I felt like this is just the way that life is. I didn't know any different. I didn't know any better. Just like for a very long period of time, I used to flinch when people would get too angry or upset, I used to flinch all of the time because I felt like a hit was coming. And I saw abuse, and then I ended up in an abusive relationship. And my sisters both ended up in abusive relationships, and it's a pattern, it's a generational curse.
So I have also heard the sentiment that, oh, well, you have this because you're Black, or you have this because you've been afforded some different privilege based on who you are.
Hmm.
I'm going to ask you a deeply personal question.
Sure.
Talk to me about how this has played into your workaholism and perfectionism.
Well, when I was younger, I felt like I had no control over my life.
Mm.
And I wasn't sure where I fit in. And for me, I don't know if it's because I'm a Capricorn or if it's just the way that I'm wired in general, but I have always been an overachiever. School was the one place where I really shined. And one of my coping mechanisms was reading books. So I would go into a corner and read a book, and I wouldn't be able to hear anything else around me because I was completely immersed in whatever was happening in that book, and I retained the information very well. And so school always was kind of easy for me, which was really good because we moved around so much that I went to like 10 elementary schools, 3 junior highs, I think maybe about 7 high schools total by the time I was done. And it was my saving grace that I was smart. And I used to tell myself, if I can just make it to college,
Mm.
everything will be better. I can have control of my own life. I don't have to move at the whim of my mother. I don't have to be running from these people or whatever. I thought college was kind of like the holy grail
Now,
of,
was that a message that you got at home, or was that something that you just kind of knew from society in
yeah,
general?
it was just, it wasn't from home because not a ton of people in my family graduated from college. We had some, but it was more so that for one, nobody thought I was going to make it to college.
Mm.
So there was a little bit of like, I'll show you kind of a
Spite.
thing. Yeah. And I think some of it was also just like, for me, I loved learning. It was the natural next step. I loved books and reading, and school was always easy for me. So when I made it to college, I felt like it was the first time that I finally had some control over my own destiny.
Now, in college, you get to choose your path, you get to choose your relationships, you get to start to build your
Mhm.
adult life. Talk to me about what that was like for you.
Well, I had started living an adult life when I was like 14.
Mm.
And so for me, college was not the woo experience that some might think because I had already, been kicked out of my house when I was 14 years old, going on 15. I had lived on the streets. I had, experienced all kinds of things. I went to juvenile detention. I had seen people murdered before. I had been exposed to the world of drugs and just abuse and homelessness and all of those things. And so by the time I got to college, I felt like I had already kind of seen it all. And I was always actually a little amused by the people who would just go crazy when they got to college because it was their first time being kind of free. Whereas I
Wow.
looked at college as a lifeline. And so for me, it was really important. I could go out and party until 4 o'clock in the morning, but you can best believe that my papers were written like on time, that I went to class, that because I knew why I was there and I knew where I was trying to get to. And all of the other stuff was just extra.
I've heard a lot that people who struggle, who have kind of a traumatic story and who really have something to prove, are the ones who tend to sort of rocket to the top,
Mhm.
who tend to take on those higher level positions. Do you think that played a role in how you attained leadership?
I think it played a role in my ambition. I think the way that we are afforded leadership in our roles is really political.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter how ambitious I am. I think office politics plays a huge part into the type of leadership roles that we're allowed to step into. And what was different for me was that I used to think that all leaders had to look and act and be a certain way. And what changed for me was realizing that I don't have to have the role or the title to be a leader. I can lead from where I'm at. And some people are natural born leaders. And I feel like I was a natural born leader. It was whenever I was in a group, I was always in charge. I was always the leader. People looked to me for direction and guidance. And I just assumed that role. So it was very natural. I didn't know that it was called leadership, really. I just felt like this is how I am. I'm a take charge kind of a person.
Well, and you've kind of had that role in your, like you said, when you were born, you were already an aunt.
Mm-hmm.
So you've kind of had that role within your family context too
Mm-hmm.
for your whole life. So you've just been prepping for a really long time to
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
to stand in it.
yep.
So one of the things that I say is that people tend to show up to the workplace. We all put on a mask, but we're showing up with all of the trauma that we had as children. We're showing up with all of the challenges, with all of the things that have affected us. And then we just sort of put a nice veneer over it and act like what we think a leader is supposed to be until we can't.
Yeah, it's so true because it's really about masking yourself when you're at work to be, like I said, more palatable for other people. And you don't get to decide when your trauma decides to rear its ugly face. And for me, I accelerated throughout life very quickly because I had a goal and a plan. I was going to get through school. I was going to get 2 master's degrees and do this and go, all of these things. And I had not dealt with the trauma that I had experienced. I had not dealt with the trauma of the abuse that I experienced in my younger years. I was in a very abusive relationship on and off for about 6 years, from about the age of 18 to 24. And a lot of the trauma I had never dealt with. And so I was having flashbacks, I was having dreams, and I just things would trigger me in different ways. And it's hard to mask yourself at work all the time because you literally work more than you do anything else in your life. You spend more time with your colleagues a lot of times than you even spend with your family or your friends. And so when you're dealing with those kinds of situations, you get to a point where you're like, I have to do some internal work or this is going to really mess with me. This is going to get to a point where I'm not able to achieve, or it's going to get to a point where I'm going to have a lot of demons moving forward. And so I had to start working on internal healing. And I went to therapy. I take medication to help with my anxiety. When you grow up that way, and the way that I did, you don't come out unscathed, no matter how well you try to hide it. And trying to pretend to be somebody at work all the time is exhausting. And it also just feels like you're hiding part of yourself. You can't bring your full self anywhere. And it's not to say, I know some people will say, well, you don't need to overshare at work. And it's not about making sure everybody at work knows my whole life story. That's not what the point of it is. The point is that I feel like I should be able to show up authentically without being penalized for it. And so far, that has not been the case.
Unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have been in leadership for a long time, but you haven't always felt comfortable with being open about some of the things that you've gone through. I can remember having a phone conversation with you maybe 8 years ago, and I was sitting outside my job in the parking lot, and you were telling me I'm being asked to do this thing that would expose some of my background, and I'm worried about doing it, and should I do it? Or should I keep that to myself because of my career? Do you remember that conversation? Yeah. So what was it like? Was there a moment when you said, I can't keep all this in anymore. It's not benefiting me. It's not benefiting my employer. It's not benefiting anybody.
I think I don't know that it was just one moment. What happened with me was it happened in phases. So Boys Town had come and did a story when I lived in Arizona. They did a story about me that played on commercials and different things in the Omaha area. And they also used it with donors. And that was kind of the first step in that direction of really sharing more about the personal parts, the really traumatic things that I experienced. But I only shared so much because I was worried as somebody who works in the legal industry, how are you going to talk about a past where there were a lot of illegal things? And are they going to hold things against me? Is this going to hinder my career progression? What's going to happen? And that was my first concern. I think now that years have passed and as I have gradually kind of started exposing more and more about my life, I've gotten to a point where I feel like I shouldn't have to be ashamed of the experiences that shaped me. And I only have this one life. And I shouldn't have to spend the rest of my life being ashamed of the first 20 years of my life. And especially for things that were not my fault, circumstances that I had no control over. And the more I thought about it, the more angry I got because it just felt so unfair that I couldn't share these pieces of myself if I chose to.
Mhm.
Not that I needed to share it with everyone, but that I felt like I should have a choice about what and how much and when I wanted to share something.
And sometimes I think it feels like so much of what we, even when we think we're making choices, we're doing it within this larger societal construct,
Hmm.
right? I am going to do what I want to do, but it still falls within what
Hmm.
society has deemed acceptable.
Yep.
What I'm going to wear, what my hair is going to look like,
Yeah.
I haven't seen lately whether or not this is the case, but I know that there were pieces of legislation that were being pushed through so that we could wear our hair in its
Oh,
natural
yeah. Like the
state.
Crown Act. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And it's something that I think disproportionately affects Black people because of braids and the different styles, locks, and different things that whether men have longer hair or whether women choose to wear their hair into braids or in different styles. And I've had my hair regulated at work. One of the first law firms that I worked at when I was in Arizona, one time I had gotten highlights put in my hair and they didn't like my highlights. And it came up in a review that I needed to tone down my hair color. So I had to go back to the hairdresser and have them put black in my maroon highlights because it was too flashy for them. And since I was in marketing, it was, I'm the face of the firm apparently, and could not have as many maroon highlights in my hair as I had wanted. So things like that have affected me and they've affected other particularly Black minorities in the workplace.
Highlights is wild.
Hmm.
There was an experience that I had in the workplace that I was at the time where I was experiencing sexual harassment, where I was experiencing racial comments, and you are the person that I reached out
Hmm.
to say, "Hey, this happened to me." Does that happen to you a lot? Do people reach out to you often?
Oh, yeah. I get reached out to all the time about really random things and at any time of the day and night. I know you go to bed around
I sure
8:30.
do.
But one of the reasons that I always keep my phone on
Mm.
is because I've had so many different people reach out to me at 3 o'clock in the morning or this or that. It's part of my anxiety that if I turn off my phone, someone will need me and I won't be able to help them. And sometimes it's just for advice. Sometimes it's because I'm the ride or die kind of chick that's like, yes, I will go and pick you up out in the cold in the wintertime at 3 o'clock in the morning because you need a ride. And that is just, I think, that is a result of me having been in situations where I felt like I didn't have anyone to turn to. When I was homeless, I reached out to different people and I was able to sleep on a couch one night here or, every once in a while there, but it it was always with strings attached and conditions a lot of times, I would always try to clean their house or do different things so that I didn't feel like I was taking advantage of them or so that I didn't feel like so much of a burden. And feeling like a burden to other people caused me, I think, a lot of times to have more empathy when it comes to other people who reach out and need help.
So while you're serving as everyone else's emergency crisis line,
Hmm.
what does it look like to hold space for yourself? How do you take care of you?
That's a great question. For a long time, I didn't take care of myself. Now I've made myself a priority, which I started going to therapy. I go every 2 weeks. I started taking medication when I felt like the anxiety and things was just too much for me to deal with by myself. I engage more in self-care. I do spa days. I do, um, just different things where I make myself a priority. I like to travel, so I travel all around the world. I usually drag people with me when I go. You've
I've
been a
been
part of that. And I engage in self-care in that way. I feel like emotionally, I stopped reaching out to people because I overheard one of my friends in college who made a comment about me, and they were like, "Oh, Diana always has something going on. There's always drama. She always has, there's always something with her family or something like that." And so it made me more reluctant to share things outwardly as much
Mm.
because I didn't want to be the Debbie Downer, the negative Nancy, the woe is me girl who always was having a problem. And so I learned to shoulder a lot of my trauma myself and not reach out to other people as much. But one way that is cathartic for me
Yeah.
now is I share things on my LinkedIn posts and through podcasts like Breaking Rank because it gives me an opportunity to share my story, to give advice, but also learn from the people that I'm interviewing and to hear how they move through life. Like what got them through? What can I learn from their stories and experiences?
So, talk to me about the name of your podcast.
Mhm.
What does breaking rank really mean for you?
So, breaking rank means for me that so many leaders are cookie cutter molds. If you look at the people who are in the top spots, especially in my industry, they all look alike. They dress alike. I mean, literally, I've been in so many conversations where everyone talks about shopping at Ann Taylor Loft. And, just whatever the
Not the
case
lot.
might be. Yes, I've nothing against it personally, but it is just like you really have to wear clothes there, apparently, to get a promotion. And I've seen a lot of Black women be stuck at certain ceilings, and
Mm.
we're just supposed to be happy we made it this far while we just like step back and let the others take the leadership positions. We're told we need to be more consistent.
Mm.
We're told that we need to put in more effort and we need to manage our stakeholders better. And, you know, we need to be more professional in the workplace. And those are the reasons given for why we are overlooked, why we don't get permissions, why or promotions, why we don't get the titles. And I think it's bullshit. And so for me, I just kind of decided, look, if you're not giving me the title and you're not giving me the promotion, I'm going to say whatever the hell I want to say. And I'm going to do it on my terms. And it's going to look different than what it looks like for you. And that's okay. And for me, that is what breaking rank is. It is stepping outside of that norm, stepping outside of that the uniformity that leadership apparently looks like to the corporate world and saying, I'm going to make my own path. Whether you recognize it, whether you give it to me, or whether I take it, or whether I just assume leadership in some organization that recognizes my accomplishments and my contributions, I'm going to make my own path. And that to me is what breaking rank means. I love that quality that I see when I look at a leader who leads differently, who inspires aspiring leaders and who made it in this industry or any other industry by doing things on their terms.
Now, some of your background, some of the things that you've been through, people may not have been through exactly what you've been through, but I think that they can really resonate with the idea of showing up and having to hide who it is that they really are or
Mhm.
something about themselves, or
Mhm.
having fear about not showing up in exactly the right way in the workplace to be taken seriously. What are some of these early conversations that you had with people look like? What can people expect from breaking rank?
Well, hopefully, what people can expect are some really badass leaders who have stories that really uh, give examples of how things can be done differently and you can still be successful. And I think that there's a great lineup of guests that I've talked to, all very different from different walks of life, although I have noticed some very common themes in terms of motivations that prompted people to lead differently. I think they'll hear stories. I think aspiring leaders will be able to listen to Breaking Rank and relate to someone and learn to be their own person. Learn to come out into the workplace and feel like it's okay to be different. It's okay to do things that don't look and feel like what the right thing, that corporate society tells you is the right thing to do. It's okay. There's a permission in that. And the tagline for Breaking Rank is leadership without permission, because you can be unapologetically who you are and still be successful. And it's small people that try to make you feel like you have to wear your hair like them, and that you have to give feedback the way they do, and that you have to lead a meeting the way they lead a meeting.
Mm.
And I reject that. And I hope that people who watch this podcast can think for themselves and decide, what does leadership really look like for them? And how can they embody it in that way?
So, as a leader, how do you foster that among your team? How do
Mm,
you create more leaders who believe that this is the way we should be operating?
yeah. Well, my teams know, the teams that I've managed, and I lead a global team, they know that I'm invested in their professional development. I work with them to track their goals. I try to understand how they work, so that I'm not saying, that, Joe Schmo over here has to operate the same way that Lindsay Smith over there has to operate. I learn what incentivizes people on my team, and I try to delegate accordingly if I'm able to. I invest a lot in my team because I try to lead in a way that I have not experienced leadership. And I've had some good bosses and I've had some really bad bosses. And I learned just as much from both of them, from both types of bosses. And so I try to incorporate that into my leadership and my management style.
Okay,
Yeah.
rapid fire.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Rapid fire question. What is the worst thing anyone has ever said to you at work?
I had a lawyer yell at me, and he told me that I was incompetent, that I was a cost center and not a profit center, that everyone who works in my department should literally be fired. He has no idea why the firm invests in departments like mine. And the list goes on. He yelled at me for about 30 minutes, and then he did call me back, to which I thought he was going to apologize, but he did not. He called to yell at me for another 30 minutes. And so that was probably one of the worst conversations I've had in a work environment. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. What is the best? Talk to me a little bit about the best leader that you've had.
The best leader at the time, I didn't know that she was the best leader. I thought she was cool and there were great things about her. It wasn't until I had more career experience and I experienced various types of leadership did I recognize how lucky I was to have a leader that deeply cared for me, that was invested in my success, that took me everywhere with her and let me shadow her, that gave me a platform and a seat at the table when I was young and people were looking at me like, who is this chubby cheeked, curly haired girl who's 23 years old sitting at the table like she knows something? And she gave me that opportunity. When I had an ectopic pregnancy and was literally bleeding out in the hospital, she sat there with me for 8, 12 hours,
Wow.
came to the hospital every single day that I was there, after my surgery, after everything. And so she embodied the type of leader that I wanted to be. Not necessarily every leader needs to get so invested personally in people, but she knew I was alone in Arizona with no family. And she really was there and showed me that you can lead with empathy and still be effective.
That's amazing.
Hmm.
So, research shows that leaders, when hiring someone new, tend to default to somebody who reminds them of the younger version of themselves.
Mm.
How do you choose a team that doesn't necessarily just look like you, but represents a more broad array of experiences and thoughts and ideas and
Yeah.
opportunity?
I don't look for leaders who are like me. I recognize things in leaders, that certain qualities that might be similar characteristics, but I don't particularly look for leaders who lead like I do. I especially don't want them to act how I acted when I was younger. I've learned a lot. I was a hot mess for so much of my like earlier career. I was just fumbling around and learning. I thought I was handling shit really well, but when I look back, I'm just like, oh, I did not know what I was doing. And so I don't necessarily look for leaders who are like me, but I do look for certain characteristics. I like drive. I like people that take responsibility for their actions, are accountable for their actions, that have, in the field that I work in, that have empathy and that are intellectually curious. I think it takes a lot of curiosity to be a good leader because you're trying out different things. We don't know our leadership style all the time when we're 18 or 20 or even 25. It takes a while to grow and develop. And so I look for people that have skills that are moldable in some ways, and they have the desire to want to get from point A to point B to point C, and are creative in how they want to get there.
When did you know you were breaking rank?
Uh, I've been breaking rank all my life. I wasn't supposed to go to college. I wasn't supposed to do a lot of different things. I wasn't supposed to survive abuse or domestic violence or any of the things that I've been through, witnessing someone be murdered. Um, living in houses where drugs were sold, all of those things. I always felt like I was different, always. I didn't know how. I just felt like I didn't belong there, and I knew there was something better out there for me, and I just had to chase it, even if I didn't know what it looked like. So I feel like I've always been breaking rank. I've never really fit the mold. I'm not probably the person that people would describe as your, stereotypical, prototypical leader. I is that a word, prototypical?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Um, just making sure. But yeah, I lead differently, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, and I'm okay with breaking rank. It's scary, to be honest. It's not easy to break rank. It's not easy to go against the grain or to set yourself up for criticism or to feel like you might get fired for telling your story. I live with those fears, but the rewards are worth it to me. I feel like I'm a marketable person and I feel like I've been resilient most of my life. I'm like a phoenix and I will rise again.
What did I not ask you that I should have?
So, one thing I want people to walk away with on this show and from my story in particular is that there's no one particular way to lead. Um, I think that breaking rank is a movement. It's not just an action, it's a movement for people who have felt marginalized, for people who have felt censored, for people who feel like they can't bring themselves to work, or that if they do, it's going to impact their future or have negative repercussions on their future. And reject that premise. Reject that because like I said, we spend more time at work than we do anywhere else. It's a lot of time to be hiding, to be masking yourself. Be open and be who you are because who you are is unique and it's beautiful. And no one should have to make you feel like you need to conform just because they had to conform in their path, and in their upward mobility. They felt like they had to conform. We can break that and we can only break it collectively,
Mm.
and set a new standard. So that's what I want people to walk away with.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for letting me be the one to ask you all these questions. I'm
Yes.
so excited for the new podcast.
Thank you so much for the interview. I wouldn't have had anyone else do it.
That'll do it for Breaking Rank. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, I think 39 or 40 was really around the time where I said, fuck it. That was the period of time for me where I felt like I had enough experience to be making informed decisions. And I think that I had the maturity at the time and I understood the repercussions of my actions and what I would need to do if I were punished for making decisions. And I felt like I could live with that trade off. And that's when I felt that I was coming into my own and could really be confident. And I remember specifically a period of time at work. I had a horrible boss. And I just remember thinking, you know what? Fuck this. I am out. I am sending the email that's saying that I'm out. I am not going to fake it till I make it anymore. It is done. And that started it. And I think it probably also gave me a label as being difficult in the workplace, or not respecting authority or being insubordinate. But it also, for me, was very freeing and was like, you know what? You don't own me and you don't control me, and I'm not giving you power over me anymore. And after that, it's been just a slow progression of more, more movement in that direction.
Add on to that. Do you think have you gone through therapy?
Hmm.
Did therapy help with that?
Oh, therapy has been amazing. It's like, why would you not? Like, if you have to, literally, you have somebody whose job is to help you solve your problems in life. And if it makes it easier, then, if I've got to pay for somebody to help me solve my problems, I've paid for less. So
Mm.
I'm fine with that.
I've paid for less
Mm-hmm.
is huge.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I had a super important experience with a therapist when I was in Iowa. So originally, I went to a therapist and said, I'm in an abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I need to figure out how to get out of it. And the first therapist I went to invited him to the sessions and started trying to teach me his love language.
Oh my gosh.
And until I got a Black woman therapist, I didn't feel safe inside of therapy. And I went to her and she said, hey, you need to not only talk to me, you need to go talk to this organization in town, because it can't just be your word against his in court. You need a record that you've been doing X, Y, and Z to make sure that you're protected and safe in this moment that you're experiencing. And the judge is going to look at you and see a Black woman, look at him and see a white man and make a decision. So you want to make sure you do everything that is going to demonstrate that what you're saying is true.
Mm-hmm.
Night and day. Like,
Oh, yeah.
total difference, and it changed everything.
Oh yeah. I also have a Black woman therapist, so
A blessing.
yeah.
And there's so much more plentiful here.
Yes, that's the benefit of being.